There is something nobody tells you about transformation. It does not begin the day your life changes. It begins the day you become disgusted with the version of yourself you have been tolerating, because deep down you already know something is wrong. You feel it in the moments when you are alone with your thoughts. You feel it when you realize your mind has become exhausted from overthinking things that never even happen. You feel it when you look at your potential and then look at your habits, and the distance between the two quietly breaks your heart. And the terrifying part is this: most people will live their entire lives trapped inside patterns they never consciously chose. They will call it personality, they will call it fate, they will call it just the way life is. But what if your suffering is not coming from life itself? What if it's coming from the way your mind has been trained to react to life? Because somewhere along the way you learned to fear discomfort. You learned to seek validation. You learned to escape silence. You learned to emotionally depend on things that were never meant to define your worth. And today, without realizing it, your habits are shaping your destiny more than your dreams ever will. This is why you need to watch this video until the very end, because these are not motivational quotes designed to make you feel better for a few minutes. These are psychological truths that can completely alter the way you think, react, suffer, love, work, and exist. The next few minutes may challenge your ego. They may expose the excuses you've been protecting, but they may also become the moment your entire life begins to change. Because once you truly understand these Stoic principles, you will never again be able to comfortably return to the person you used to be. There is a moment in every person's life when they begin to realize that the mind can become a dangerous place to live. Not because the world is cruel, not because life is unfair, but because the voice inside their own head has become louder than reality itself. And most people never notice when this begins. It happens slowly, quietly. A thought becomes a fear becomes a habit becomes an identity, and before long they are no longer responding to life as it is. They are responding to the stories their mind keeps repeating. This is why mastering your mind is not motivational language. It is survival, because an undisciplined mind can destroy a beautiful life. It can make success feel empty. It can make love feel threatening. It can make peace feel uncomfortable. Many people are not suffering from their circumstances. They are suffering from the interpretation of their circumstances. Two people can experience the exact same rejection, the exact same failure, the exact same disappointment, and one person becomes wiser while the other becomes bitter. The event is not what defines them. The meaning they attach to it does. And this is where Stoicism becomes deeply psychological. The Stoics understood something most people still resist accepting today. You cannot always control what happens to you, but you can control the relationship you build with what happens to you. That relationship determines the quality of your entire existence, but modern life trains people to react instantly. Someone ignores your message, and suddenly your mind creates a story about abandonment. Someone criticizes you, and your nervous system treats it like danger. One uncomfortable emotion appears, and immediately you want to escape it through distraction, noise, validation, or stimulation. People no longer sit with their emotions long enough to understand them. They obey them immediately. And that is where personal power disappears. Because when every emotion becomes an instruction, you stop living consciously. You begin living automatically. Your moods decide your behavior, your fears decide your future, your impulses decide your relationships. And slowly, without realizing it, your inner world becomes unstable. You look calm on the outside, but internally you are constantly negotiating with anxiety, comparison, resentment, insecurity. The tragedy is that many people mistake emotional intensity for emotional truth. Just because something feels overwhelming does not mean it is accurate. Fear feels convincing, doubt feels intelligent, insecurity feels protective, but feelings are temporary states, not permanent realities. The Stoic learns to pause between emotion and reaction, and in that pause, something extraordinary happens. Awareness enters the room. That awareness changes everything, because now, instead of saying, "I am angry," you begin to say, "I notice anger arising in me." Instead of becoming consumed by fear, you observe fear. Instead of collapsing into sadness, you become curious about it. This creates distance between you and the emotion, and distance creates freedom. Most people spend years trying to control the external world while remaining strangers to themselves internally. They organize their schedules, build careers, chase status, chase admiration, yet remain emotionally fragile because they never learned how to sit with their own mind in silence. They know how to perform confidence. They do not know how to cultivate peace. And peace is not the absence of difficulty. Peace is the ability to remain grounded while difficulty exists. This is why the Stoics trained themselves in restraint, not because they lacked emotion, but because they understood that emotional control is a form of intelligence. A person who cannot control their reactions becomes predictable, easily manipulated, easily destabilized. But a person who remains centered under pressure develops a kind of quiet authority that cannot be manufactured. You begin to notice it in the way they speak, in the way they handle conflict, in the way they refuse to let temporary chaos define permanent decisions. They no longer need to prove their strength loudly because their discipline speaks for them, and perhaps the hardest truth is this: your mind listens to everything you repeatedly tell it. If you constantly tell yourself you are behind, broken, unlucky, unworthy, eventually your nervous system begins to live inside that identity. The mind does not care whether the story is empowering or destructive. It only responds to repetition. That means transformation begins with awareness of your internal language. The conversations you have with yourself in private become the architecture of your future. So when Stoicism asks you to master your mind, it is not asking you to suppress emotion or become cold. It is asking you to become conscious, to stop being ruled by every passing feeling, to stop allowing temporary emotions to make permanent choices, to recognize that your thoughts are not always telling you the truth. Because the moment you stop reacting to every thought, every fear, every emotional storm, you reclaim something most people lose without realizing it: authority over your own life. And the person who gains control over their own mind becomes impossible for the world to control. Most people believe transformation begins when motivation appears, but that is one of the most dangerous illusions ever created. Because motivation is unstable. It changes with mood, comfort, sleep, attention, validation. One difficult day and it disappears. One disappointment and suddenly the promises you made to yourself no longer feel important. This is why so many people remain trapped in cycles they secretly hate. They wait for emotional certainty before they act. They wait to feel ready before they change. But readiness is not a feeling. Readiness is a decision made in the presence of discomfort, and this is the part people avoid hearing. Growth is uncomfortable by nature. Real transformation disrupts the identity you have spent years protecting. It forces you to confront habits that once comforted you. It demands that you release patterns that once helped you survive. And the mind resists this immediately because the brain is designed to prefer familiarity over possibility. Even painful familiarity can feel safer than unfamiliar freedom. That is why people stay inside relationships that drain them, jobs that diminish them, habits that quietly destroy them, not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering becomes predictable, and predictability feels emotionally safe. The Stoics understood this deeply. They understood that discomfort is not always a signal to stop. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that you are finally confronting the parts of yourself you spent years avoiding. And avoidance is seductive because it offers temporary relief. But every time you avoid something difficult, you strengthen fear without realizing it. You avoid the conversation, and anxiety grows stronger. You avoid the challenge, and self-doubt grows stronger. You avoid discipline, and weakness becomes familiar. Avoidance feels safe in the moment, but over time it becomes a prison. And what is tragic is that many people organize their entire lives around avoiding discomfort. They avoid silence because silence exposes unresolved thoughts. They avoid solitude because solitude reveals emotional dependency. They avoid discipline because discipline forces them to confront inconsistency. So instead, they distract themselves endlessly. Noise becomes medicine, stimulation becomes escape, and eventually they lose the ability to sit alone with themselves without feeling restless. But the Stoic path asks something radically different of you. It asks you to stop running, to sit in the discomfort long enough to understand what it is trying to teach you, because pain is often a messenger, not an enemy. It reveals where you are attached, where you are fragile, where you are living unconsciously. And most people never evolve because they spend their entire lives numbing the very experiences meant to awaken them. Think about how quickly modern culture encourages escape. Feel sad, distract yourself, feel insecure. Seek validation, feel uncertain, consume more noise. But very few people ask a more important question: what if the discomfort itself contains the transformation? Because strength is not developed in ease, clarity is not developed in comfort, depth is not developed through convenience. The most emotionally resilient people are not people who avoided hardship. They are people who learned how to remain present inside hardship without abandoning themselves. That changes the entire structure of a human being. You begin to understand that discomfort is temporary, but avoidance becomes identity. Every time you face something difficult directly, you send a message to your mind that you are capable of surviving challenge. And confidence is not built through positive thinking. Confidence is built through evidence. Evidence created by keeping promises to yourself under pressure. This is why discipline becomes so important in Stoicism. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is proof that your future matters more than your current mood. When you wake up early despite resistance, when you remain calm despite provocation, when you continue despite uncertainty, you are rewiring your relationship with discomfort. You are teaching yourself that difficult emotions do not have authority over your actions, and this creates a profound psychological shift. Because eventually you stop seeing discomfort as a threat, you begin seeing it as a doorway. The difficult conversation becomes a doorway to honesty. The painful ending becomes a doorway to freedom. The lonely season becomes a doorway to self-respect. The disciplined routine becomes a doorway to self-trust. Suddenly, life changes because your relationship with pain changes. Most people spend years asking, "How do I avoid suffering?" The Stoic asks a different question: "How do I become stronger than the suffering?" That question changes everything because it moves you from helplessness into responsibility, and responsibility is where personal power begins. There is also something deeply liberating about no longer needing life to feel comfortable all the time. Because comfort is unstable, conditions change constantly, people leave, plans collapse, uncertainty arrives without permission. If your emotional stability depends on perfect conditions, your peace will always remain fragile. But when you train yourself to endure discomfort consciously, you develop inner stability. You stop panicking every time life becomes difficult. You stop collapsing emotionally the moment reality disappoints you. You realize that resilience is not the absence of pain. It is the refusal to let pain define you, and perhaps this is the deepest transformation of all. You stop asking life to become easier, and instead you become someone who can handle hard things without losing themselves in the process. Because the moment you stop running from discomfort, discomfort loses its power to control you. One of the most dangerous lies people tell themselves is this: "This is just who I am." They say it when they procrastinate. They say it when they overthink. They say it when they tolerate disrespect, abandon discipline, sabotage opportunities, or repeat the same destructive patterns for years. And eventually the behavior becomes so familiar that it no longer feels like a habit. It feels like identity. But Stoicism challenges this completely, because the Stoics believed character is not something you are born with fully formed. Character is constructed through repetition, through ritual, through the small decisions nobody sees. Your identity is not created in dramatic moments. It is created in ordinary moments repeated consistently over time. This is why habits matter far more than motivation. Motivation is emotional, habits are structural. Motivation disappears when life becomes difficult. Habits remain when emotions fluctuate. And the frightening truth is that whether you realize it or not, you are always training yourself into someone. Every repeated action becomes instruction for the mind. Every routine reinforces a psychological pattern. Your brain is constantly learning who you believe yourself to be based on what you repeatedly do. If every day begins with distraction, your mind learns distraction. If every challenge is met with avoidance, your mind learns fear. If every uncomfortable emotion sends you searching for escape, your mind learns emotional dependency. And eventually these behaviors stop feeling optional. They become automatic. This is why many people feel trapped inside themselves, not because transformation is impossible, but because repetition has become unconscious. They wake up every day rehearsing the same emotional pattern, the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same excuses, and then they wonder why their life never changes. But your life cannot change while your rituals remain the same. The Stoics understood that freedom is not found in intensity. It is found in consistency. Small disciplined actions repeated daily have the power to reshape an entire human being. Not instantly, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly, and that is why most people underestimate the power of habits. Because transformation rarely announces itself in the beginning. It begins in silence, in waking up when you said you would, in controlling your reaction when anger appears, in staying focused when distraction calls for your attention, in choosing long-term meaning over temporary pleasure. These moments seem insignificant individually, but repeated consistently, they alter your identity at the deepest level, and this is where psychological suffering often begins. People want a new life without becoming a new person. They want confidence without discipline, peace without self-awareness, transformation without discomfort. But identity does not change through desire alone. It changes through behavioral repetition. You cannot think your way into a stronger character while continuing the same destructive routines. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is that habits are never just physical. They are emotional. Many people are addicted to emotional states without realizing it. Addiction to chaos, addiction to stress, addiction to victimhood, addiction to seeking validation. These emotional patterns become familiar, and familiarity creates attachment. This is why some people unconsciously return to situations that hurt them. The nervous system chooses what feels familiar over what feels healthy. Even suffering can become psychologically comfortable when it has been repeated long enough. That is why change feels threatening at first, because breaking old habits is not just changing behavior. It is confronting the identity attached to those behaviors. And the mind resists that intensely. You decide to become disciplined, and suddenly resistance appears. You decide to become emotionally independent, and loneliness appears. You decide to protect your peace, and guilt appears. Because every transformation requires the death of an old pattern, and most people grieve their old identity even when that identity was destroying them. But this is where Stoicism becomes deeply liberating. It reminds you that you are not imprisoned by your past patterns unless you continue rehearsing them. The person you are today is not fixed, it is practiced, which means a different future is possible if different actions are repeated consistently. This is why the Stoics focused so heavily on daily rituals, not for perfection, but for alignment. They understood that the quality of your routines determines the quality of your mind. A chaotic life usually begins with chaotic habits. A peaceful life usually begins with intentional habits. And the most powerful habits are often invisible to other people. The habit of pausing before reacting. The habit of observing your thoughts instead of believing all of them. The habit of keeping promises to yourself. The habit of choosing discipline over impulse. The habit of protecting your attention from meaningless noise. These habits may look small externally, but internally they create stability, and stability changes the way you move through the world. Because eventually discipline no longer feels forced, it becomes identity. Emotional control no longer feels unnatural. It becomes character. Peace no longer feels temporary. It becomes your baseline. And this is the deeper truth most people never fully understand. Your future is hidden inside your daily routines. Not your intentions, not your goals, your repetitions. The person you become 5 years from now is being shaped by what you repeatedly tolerate, repeat, avoid, and prioritize today. So if you truly want to transform your life, stop obsessing over massive change. Pay attention to the quiet rituals shaping your mind every single day. Because your habits are not simply creating your schedule, they are creating you, and the moment you change what you repeatedly do, you begin changing who you repeatedly become.